Hello, all you positive heads out there. It's so good to be back with all you beautiful reflections of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. If you're new to this podcast, of course, we're super happy to have you here. And if you've been listening and enjoying for a while, I would be super grateful if you would please take a moment to give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It's one of the best and simplest ways to pay it forward and help others find the show so that they too can tap into the powerful perspectives and positive vibrations we are collectively emanating. The other unique and magical way to share this show is by sending any friends you think would benefit from listening to this podcast our Game with the Universe link at positivehead.com/game. Also listed in the show notes, which will serve them up a quote unquote random episode when they click it. Just instruct them before clicking the link to close their eyes for a moment and sincerely ask the universe to queue up the episode that contains the insight and perspectives that they most need to hear at this point in their life journey, and then click to listen to whatever episode is synchronistically served up to them. I have heard time and time again from people about the incredible results they received playing the game. So just tell your friends magical results are guaranteed or their karma back. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's SoulShare episode, I'm very excited to have Dr. David Hanscom back here with me on the show. David is an orthopedic complex spinal deformity surgeon. How's that for a mouthful? And author who was recently on episode 1861 back in December, where he shared his journey uncovering how we can all connect to our own healing capacity. And it was one of those conversations where I felt like another episode was in order so that we could extract more downloads and insights from our guest. And so really glad to have you back. Thanks for coming back on, David.
Thank you. No, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we got, you always know it's going to be a good episode. Well, one, it's not always that I want someone back on because I feel like there was so much more to extract, and then we spent 20 minutes talking before I even turned on the recording. I'm like, shoot, we should have been recording that. There was like all kinds of interesting conversation happening.
It was lively.
It was lively. Exactly. So if you guys want to hear my normal cliche opening question, the elevator, the backstory, all that is in episode 1861. Otherwise, we're going to just, dive right in. And, I know today we talked about one of the main focuses, David, is to focus on the problem of obsessive thought patterns, OCD, their role in driving chronic disease. Last time, once again, if you guys go back to that other one, we talked a lot about dynamic healing, anxiety being physiological, not psychological as well. And I'm sure some of that will come back up. But let's start, David, wherever you feel is a good place to start.
Well, I want to try to concentrate this episode on the obsessive thought patterns. And I really would encourage you to listen to the prior podcast because the details are important. It's a huge shift in thinking to understand that anxiety is just a sensation generated by your body being in fight or flight.
Right.
And we're going to use the term threat physiology. And physiology is how your body functions. For example, a parked car has no symptoms, just a parked car. You have to turn the car on before it malfunctions or functions correctly. So your body, as my friend Bruce Lipton points out so clearly, and this is sort of a crass example, but the difference between a human cadaver and a living human being is energy. Mm-hmm. We're alive. So the physiology is how your body functions. Your blood pressure, your temperature, your acid-base balance, your muscle tension, your capacity to actually avoid danger physically by running away, etc. That's all physiology. It's function. So when your body, there's two states of physiology. One is of fight or flight, which we use every day, all day long. We're on alert for danger all the time. It's how we survive. And the sensation generated by the body's chemistry is anxiety. So a friend of mine, Steve Porges, and I are, mostly from him, is making a strong push to get rid of the word anxiety. It's just a word that describes threat physiology. So we tend to treat it psychologically, which is impossible because this psychological, quote, physiological reaction is a million times stronger than your conscious brain. It's a 1,000,000 to 1 ratio.
Wow.
So you're in fight or flight, you feel agitated, whatever you want to call it. Humans have a word called anxiety that we're now going to use the word activated threat physiology. And if your threat physiology senses danger, you can take action to avoid the danger and move on. If you're trapped, your body kicks in more of a stress physiology or threat physiology, and you become angry. So anxiety and anger are the same process. Anger is a more activated threat physiology. So we're going to get rid of the word anger and use activated threat physiology for anxiety and hyperactivated threat physiology for anger. It's the same process. The problem with both of those is that your brain goes offline.
Oh, wow.
So your thinking brain goes from your metabolic activity and blood supply shifts from the thinking brain down to the limbic system or the survival brain. And that's why humans end up doing so many terrible things to each other, is because we're reacting to something from the past. In other words, something said danger. We react. The blood supply shifts away from our thinking brain to the survival brain. And humans do a lot of really bad things to each other based on the limbic system. So it's about survival. So again, it's a million times stronger than your conscious brain. We use the term dynamic healing, that there's two parts to healing. One is actually processing anger and anxiety real quickly, efficiently. Remember, they are both gifts. If you didn't have anger and anxiety, you wouldn't be alive. That's how we stay alive, right? So I talk about developing a working relationship with them. Your personal identity becomes separated from the survival reaction. And then your conscious brain is the other half of the healing process, because now it can thrive. It can go into the spiritual journey, play, pleasure, friends, good food, good wine, whatever experience you want to do, you can do that if the anxiety, anger circuits are de-energized. But again, multiple times a day. There's no one and done. You don't conquer anxiety and anger. You learn to live with it. And then when you have your chances to pursue joy, you can do it. You can't use joy to counteract anxiety and anger. They're sort of mutually exclusive process. But what I'm trying to talk about today, which I think is the essence of all chronic disease, turns out all chronic disease, mental and physical, is hypermetabolic. In other words, you're consuming fuel, and it's inflammatory.
Wow.
In fact, half your brain is part of the immune system. So half the brain is neurons, half the brain is what's called glial cells, which have inflammatory receptors all over it. So when you're in threat physiology, your brain itself is actually inflamed. It's hyperactive. It's short-circuiting. All sorts of things are happening in your brain when you're under fight or flight. So the problem is when your brain is hyperactivated, and here's the essence of today's talk, is obsessive thought patterns. People make the joke of monkey mind, which is not a joke at all. And as I work with more and more people and talk to them very carefully, everybody has this.
Yeah.
Now, some people to a little degree, some people to a greater degree. I had the full Monty, which was called an obsessive compulsive disorder. And I had no idea what it was, but it was manifested by repetitive, intrusive, disturbing thought patterns that I could not escape from. The research term is called unpleasant repetitive thoughts. And OCD is considered untreatable by the psychiatric profession. And we'll talk about that in a second.
Wow.
But I maintain it's an arbitrary diagnosis. Everybody has obsessive thought patterns. Some people a little bit, some people a lot. They tend to get worse as you get older, just with repetition. And there's a reason for that. But I don't know anybody, when I talk to them carefully, that they sort of sit them and go, oh yeah, because you can have a great life, just a great life. And sometimes the better your life, the more these obsessive thought patterns come into play.
The better
your life, because you have less, in other words, instead of fighting for survival, you have a great life. And so did you ever see that TV series called White Lotus by chance?
I did, actually. I watched season 1 of White Lotus.
Okay, well, season 2 is also equally
I
as
heard this.
interesting.
I heard it's hilarious and great.
Well, they interviewed Mike White, which I thought was very interesting. He's a genius writer, as you
So
know.
well done. Yeah.
And his point being that these people come into this wealthy resort and they bring the troubles with them.
Yeah. Right.
And his point being is that when you're wealthy, have everything you need, you have no excuse. You can't blame anybody for anything. So you've lost that excuse.
Right.
And you go to a beautiful vacation resort and you can't blame anything.
Right.
And people still behave badly. Why is that? Because what happens, the ultimate trap, the ultimate source of stress is these intrusive thoughts.
Yeah.
You cannot escape your thoughts. So the research term is called URTs, unpleasant repetitive thought patterns. And I call it phantom brain pain. They're sort of these spinning circuits that keep spinning away. They're not responsive to rational control. And the more you fight them, the stronger they become. And so as people get older, they start getting drowned in these thoughts. And
I've seen it with my father, like with his tires on his truck as an example. You know, we joke all the time. My brother always makes the joke about like, you know, everything comes back to the tires, you know, getting new tires or, you know, it's like, it's like, why so much energy around something so trivial?
Right. So what I'm hoping to sort out, and you're welcome to share as little or as much as you want with your personal experience, but these obsessive thought patterns, I think, are the basis for all chronic disease, all of it. And here's why this is why I think that.
That's an intense like thought and realization, right? Wow.
Well, think about this. First of all, okay, I'm not sure which way to come at this because there's a bunch of layers to this, but my first point being is that we know out of UCLA, and actually many other papers show that emotional pain and physical pain are processed. They share similar circuits in the brain. Okay, so remember, humans have consciousness, but my cat also has consciousness. So you watch her look around, she's looking for danger. If there's danger, she responds in a millisecond. And when the danger goes away, she lays down.
Yeah.
So humans have the same response. If somebody holds a gun to our head, we're obviously going to try to get out of the way or do what we need to do.
Yep.
That's danger. But see, thoughts do the same thing. The problem with your thoughts is that you cannot escape them.
Yeah.
And what's even worse, so the only thing we know to do is to suppress them. Well, that's been shown to have even more of an effect on your physiology than actually experiencing them.
That really leads to disease.
So
Dis-ease.
what do you, right. So right, exactly. That's a good point. So, okay, I have a great life. And when I had my OCD hit me, I was in practice, beautiful child, beautiful home. I remember skiing 3 feet of powder in Alta, Utah with my 10-year-old son and being so miserable. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
So what happens, there's a desperation of success because what happens, you've done everything you're supposed to do as a human being to be, quote, successful. And I could not have been more miserable.
Yeah.
And my brain was full of these crazy, disturbing, racing thoughts. And they started probably in retrospect back in high school a little bit, but they started hitting me hard in my orthopedic residency, just because of pure stress. And by the time I hit my spine fellowship, it was getting pretty bad. And then about 10 years into this, I just flipped into a full-blown obsessive compulsive disorder. Now I'm saying OCD just for sort of a placeholder. I don't like the diagnosis. I just think psychological diagnoses are not very helpful. So I had obsessive thought patterns that were extreme, disturbing, interfering with my life. And lots of people have different degrees of that. They say, well, I don't have OCD. Well, are you enjoying your life with these crazy thoughts floating around in your head? So again, the first reason I think that these obsessive thought patterns or disturbing thought patterns are the basis of all chronic disease because you can't escape them. So it fires up your body's physiology. The essence of all chronic disease, mental and physical, is sustained threat physiology. So it turns out that research is quite clear at the genomic expression level. The genome, your DNA has sequences that we call genes that dictate how your body runs. So for instance, there's 30 genes that dictate the production of these white blood cells that destroy bacteria. They're called monocytes. So under chronic stress, these in social isolation, which are two major stresses, these monocytes turn into what's called warrior monocytes. In other words, instead of attacking just viruses and bacteria, they also attack your own tissue.
Wow.
It's like killer bees compared to bees.
Wow.
So that's a very clear cause and effect of social stresses on your immune system. So that's one factor. So again, the consciousness is solved the same way physical pain is. But with physical pain, we have what's called a nociceptive system. So if you come close to a hot stove, your brain says danger. Your brain automatically pulls your hand away. We call that the nociceptive system. So with unpleasant physical sensations, too bright, too loud, etc., we avoid those because the sensations simply say danger.
Yeah.
So your body's programmed to
Shut it off,
right? So what the nociception really does, your body's evolved in a way to guide yourself, guide your behavior in a way that you don't have pain. Why would I be touching a hot stove all day long?
No.
So your body automatically keeps you away from physical pain. Now, the problem with mental pain is called the nociceptive stop system. With emotional pain, we don't have that. We don't have a stop system for emotional pain. So your brain says, so you have emotional nociceptive pain that you perceive as dangerous. You can't withdraw from it. You can't escape it. So we suppress it or repress it, which fires up the physiology more. And in fact, one paper shows that repressed thoughts actually shrink the hippocampus of your brain, which is the memory center.
Wow.
So and the reason why that does that, because your body's in an inflammatory state. So let me go back to fight or flight for a second. What's threat physiology? So your adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol, histamines are all elevated. You're consuming fuel from your body. You're actually shifting the blood supply from your brain to your muscles, to your muscles. So the blood supply shifts away from your gut, away from your bladder. It goes to your lungs, breathing more quickly. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles become more supplied with blood. You sweat. So you have this physiological response to escape. But your brain's not working as well. Your gut's not working as well. And so hence you have symptoms like irritable bowel syndrome or spastic bladder or migraine headaches because those organs are actually inflamed. So the essence of all chronic disease is sustained threat physiology. The essence of healing is getting into safety, because this is what's so exciting about this whole process that I call dynamic healing, but it's not me. It's your body. In other words, just connecting with your own capacity to heal. So think about this. When you're in safety, you're storing fuel, you're resting, you're emptying waste products, and your body really does regenerate. Body really does heal. Your physical and mental symptoms actually resolve because you're not in an inflammatory state. There's little molecules called cytokines. There's inflammatory ones that fire up everything. There's also anti-inflammatory ones that calm down everything. So when we talk about dynamic healing, this is not a joke, not mind over matter. It's not David Hanscom. It's your body's capacity to heal itself, and it does.
Great.
But how can you heal if you're in a constant state of fight or flight? So the essence of all chronic disease is sustained exposure to threat physiology. And the essence of healing is minimizing that time and going into safety. But with your thought patterns, how do you escape? Right. So with these obsessive thought patterns, your body's in some level of fight or flight, sometimes more or less. And we do know right now we have a very stressed group of teens and people in their 20s. And there's a term called deaths of despair. Have you heard of this? It's bad. So teen suicide amongst kids 10 to 14 and also amongst teenager is a higher cause of death than car accidents.
Wow.
And
at what age?
10 to 14 and also teens.
Wow.
So what's happening is that and so Dr. Lustig is a friend of mine. He wrote a book called Fat Chance. So he attributes it to two things. One is sugar, highly inflammatory, fructose.
Yeah.
And the other one is the smartphone, which started in 2007, and the suicide rates started to climb.
Wow.
And the problem with smartphones is that it's addicting.
Very. We were just talking about this last night. Like, we're gonna, I was talking to my son about this, and he's a very cerebral, intelligent young man, and he's just like, Dad, I think we're gonna look back on this era of social media and cell phones as like this, kind of dark moment where we all got trapped in this, like it's like, oh wow, we've really fell in a hole with that one. That like we got completely hacked. It was super nasty.
How old is he?
23, 24.
Well, I mean, it's the same hit as cocaine or heroin. This is not a joke.
Right.
And so it's so accessible, and why not? And all of us have to deal with this at some level.
Yep.
So we're overwhelmed with sensory overload.
Mm-hmm.
We have, and the problem with the smartphone, when Dr. Lustig pointed out in this lecture, is that you have happiness, which is serotonin, and you have dopamine, which is rewards. And every time you hit that button on the cell phone, you get a dopamine hit.
Yeah.
So you feel good. So you want more.
It's a false reward. Right?
It's a reward. It's actually a true reward. The trouble is it's not life.
Right.
Not contentment, right?
It's not the same reward like from going to the gym and getting like real results in your life.
Right. But it's addicting. So, but anyway, I'm still segueing badly here. So let me go back to our original conversation. So every chronic disease, so they've looked at anxiety, depression, OCD, bipolar, and schizophrenia are all inflammatory disorders. Every one of them.
Yeah.
And if you think about it logically, you've heard the term, you lose your mind. You watch people become mentally ill. They didn't choose that. Why all of a sudden did their mind just flip out? Well, your brain's literally on fire.
Yeah.
So again, that physiological reaction is 1,000,000 times stronger than your conscious brain. And the reason why these thought patterns are considered unsolvable is that we use talk therapy, we use behavioral modification, but your brain's on fire.
Yeah.
You got to put out the fire.
Right.
So I went from extreme OCD, horribly disturbing visual, vivid thought patterns for at least 10 years, really severe the last 3 years. I was actively suicidal.
Wow.
And I'm convinced now that when people commit suicide is that there's no other way of escaping these thoughts.
Right.
So I think it's a driving force behind suicide. People think suicide is an act of depression. It's an angry act. Remember, anger is destructive because it's supposed to be destructive.
Right.
The ultimate act of destruction is self-destruction.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why there's so many murder-suicides, because it's an angry, destructive force. It takes a lot of energy to kill somebody, especially yourself. So it's not first of all, depression is an inflammatory disorder. Your brain's inflamed. You've shifted the blood supply from your thinking brain to your limbic system or the survival brain. You're not thinking clearly. And by the way, again, sorry I keep segueing here. I also realized years ago is that I have lots of patients who absolutely neglect every aspect of their health. They don't sleep, they eat badly, they don't exercise, or 200 pounds overweight.
Whew.
Why would you do that? I'll just ask you that rhetorical question to take a break.
Yeah.
So, I'm covering a lot of territory here. So what?
Self-loathing, self-anger, a lack of self-love.
Well, I think that's right. But what drives that? I mean, why wouldn't you love yourself?
Really crappy thoughts.
Your brain's on fire.
Yeah.
So what happened, I realized that, okay, anger and anxiety are the same thing. One's activated threat physiology, one is hyperactive. Anger is destructive, including self-destructive. So when you completely neglect every aspect of your health, you don't care.
Yep.
It's just slow suicide is what it is. Number two, you also don't have the emotional energy to do it. In other words, if you're driving your car down the freeway in second gear, you're using every ounce of energy this car has. Same thing with your body. You don't have the energy to get healthy.
Yeah, right.
And then plus your brain's in the survival mode, not in the thinking creative mode. So I'm still segueing. So the other half of the equation is that Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cardiac disease, diabetes, hypertension, adult onset diabetes, obesity, autoimmune disorders, cancer, osteoporosis, neurological disorders are all inflammatory disorders. Every one of them comes from the same problem. So going back to the cellular level is that the genomic expression. But the other problem, which is even bigger, there's a little engine in the cell called mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
There are little engines within each cell that create a chemical reaction that allows us to live. It provides the energy for life. So when you're under threat physiology, your mitochondria actually breaks down. We call it fissuring, just breaks into pieces. And a really inflammatory reaction occurs. And so with this mitochondrial breakdown sequence, it occurs in every one of these diseases, mental and physical. So there's a common link for all chronic disease, which again is threat physiology. So let's go back to thoughts. So remember, in dynamic healing, you have your circumstances or stresses, you have your nervous system that processes them, then you have your physiology, the output, because when your stresses are interpreted by your brain as danger, you go into threat physiology. So again, when your thoughts are perceived as dangerous, you're in threat physiology. You can't escape your thoughts. What do? You're in threat physiology and people get sick, physically and mentally sick. And when I say physically and mentally, I'm trying to change the terminology because it's all the same thing. You have a fired up nervous system, fired up physiology, you have mental manifestations, and you have physical manifestations, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So the final piece of evidence I'll present, we do need to discuss this in a lot more detail, is that out of Chicago, there's a research tool called functional MRI scans. So it points out that between the frontal neocortex, which is the thinking brain, and the limbic system, there's a connection that when it is there, if you have a new injury, specifically back injury, there's an 80% chance that injury will become chronic if that link is already there. Mm. So our contention, is why is that link there? In other words, you haven't had an injury before. All of a sudden you have a back injury. All of a sudden it becomes chronic. Why? So my contention, and a few other people now are saying, well, what about consciousness? You have this ongoing pathway just being etched into your brain, and you start plugging in body parts. And then what happens is that I had 17 different symptoms when I was in chronic pain myself. So I had migraine headaches, ringing in my ears, stomach issues, burning in my feet, skin rashes, itching in my scalp. That was just a short list of what I had.
Wow.
I had anxiety, depression, OCD. You could call it bipolar if you want. So I had 17 of these symptoms. They are all gone, every one of them.
Wow.
I mean, there's 50 million people in America have ringing in their ears. We call it tinnitus.
Yeah, my brother-in-law does.
Mine's gone. I had it for 25 solid years. Wow. It's gone.
Wow.
I never ever thought that would go away. I'm saying this with my migraine headaches. I had those since I was 5 years old.
Wow.
Gone. But what I'm super excited about is that I'll call it OCD again, but my intrusive thought patterns are gone. They're just gone.
Yeah.
And I had that for at least 20, 25 years. And
it's a long time.
So not only do I not have these incredibly horrible obsessive thought patterns, which are occurring every 2 or 3 minutes all day long, I don't have the normal intrusive thoughts that I had before I got sick. That just isn't part of my life anymore.
Yeah.
Now, how is that possible?
Great question.
Okay. All right. So let's just unpack this just for a second. We just covered a huge amount of turf here.
Yeah.
Probably more than I told you. I try to keep it simple. I don't know if
I think you did a great job for something as complex as this. So
it's complicated because there's lots more data that supports these ideas. But I just want to say that I think these, I'll use the word intrusive thought patterns, disturbing thought patterns, bizarre thought patterns are the reason why we stay in sustained fight or flight and why we get sick mentally and physically. That's my contention.
Yeah. A lot of evidence to support it.
Yeah. So then, just to be really clear, people tell about what you're saying is psychological. That's not true. So let's get rid of the word psychology for a second. So let's look at a negative thoughts as sensory input. So if you experience the negative thoughts, that's sensory input. If you suppress the negative thoughts, it's even worse.
Mm-hmm.
Your threat physiology is up either way. So look at thoughts as sensory input and your physiology as your emotions. It's what you feel.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're full of these stress chemicals, you feel stressed. And people think stress is psychological. That's not true. It's your body. It's a sensation generated by your body's response to danger.
Mm-hmm.
So to get clear, the psyche, of course, is your thoughts and consciousness. So the problem with psychology, people say, well, it's imaginary. It is not. It's a physiological state. And when your brain's on fire, then these thought patterns come out like clay pigeons at a shooting range. So the reason why OCD or obsessive thought patterns are not considered solvable is because, again, we're using rational means, talk therapy, which is a fraction of the power of your survival brain. And what's not happening is that they're not acknowledging the physiology. So I'm out of OCD. I've helped many people out of OCD. It's not with talk therapy. It's just learning tools that calm down your nervous system, calm down your physiology.
Mm-hmm. So it's almost like in reverse. If you calm down your physiology, then it will work the other way to affect the inputs,
right?
Of which are the thoughts. Because we talk a lot about those inputs on the show and how to, for me, I figure, I've just trained my brain to, you and I talked about the philosophy before we turned this on, the ultimate nature of reality and consciousness and spirituality and that kind of thing. And for me, what really supports that belief system is the results it gets me. This idea, it's all happening for me, not to me. And, that it's all a gift in disguise. And so becomes my I had a rub with my mother and son yesterday, family sort of issue. And it's like the old me would have told a way different story around it. And it would have turned into much more. Instead, it's like, oh, hold on. There's an opportunity here. There's an opportunity for healing and growth. And so it instantly shifts that input in how I'm viewing it. But what you're talking about here is if you're so far down the road, you can't even begin to shift the input because you're barely the car's barely running. You're on fire. You're already in that state of fight or flight. So finding a way to change, the physiology, then is going to help to work. It's almost like the opposite direction of how we talk a lot about on the show, changing the inputs. Am I assessing that correctly?
Absolutely. But let me just ask you a question, just rhetorically, which is not intended to be answered correctly. But okay, anxiety and anger are activated and hyperactivated threat physiology. You got that, right? Mm-hmm. It's not responsive to rational control. How do you lower anxiety and anger?
Breath work works pretty well.
So those are methods, but the answer I'm actually looking for is simply lower your threat physiology.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the core issue today, is that there's a bunch of ways, and that's one of them, by the way. So I don't want to go into the whole dynamic healing model today because in our episode, we covered that. But I really want to focus on these obsessive thought patterns. So the answer is yes, breath work directly stimulates the vagus nerve, which lowers threat physiology. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'll make sure that we cover this aspect, idea how prevalent these intrusive thoughts are, how universal they are, how we can't escape them. We don't have any automatic withdrawal reaction to escape these things. So I just want to have you, I know we've already talked about this, I know you agree with me, but I just want to make sure that we state this really clearly, that I think human consciousness, and you call it cognitive consciousness, in other words, we have language and concepts that my cat doesn't have. Mm-hmm. That cognitive consciousness is, I think, the source of all chronic disease.
Wow. Yeah. That makes so much sense to me. And
so this hypothesis just hit me a few weeks ago. Wait a second. So I started about this connection to the brain. By the way, out of New England, there's a Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett who wrote a book called How Emotions Are Made, and she talks about the nature of consciousness. And the basic core part of what I want to present today is that thoughts and concepts become embedded in humans' brains as concretely as a chair or a table.
Mm.
And the more you repeat the concepts, the more stories you create about yourself, the stronger they become.
Right.
So a lot of these concepts. So anyway, I just want to go. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next phase of this. We'll go about the solution last.
Okay.
So a huge part of our problem is this search for self-esteem.
Right. Right.
So self-esteem is a judgment pattern. Every second, you're either better than or less than the person next to you. So we have these horribly disturbing threat physiology. These sensations are intended to be incredibly unpleasant because they're survival sensations. So then we're using these rational means to try to compensate for these horrible sensations, and it's a mismatch. So what we do, we're in this endless search for self-esteem. Somehow if we cognitively feel better about ourselves, we're going to somehow counteract these reactions, and it's impossible. So there's an opposite process that occurs to actually cause the healing. I call it the sequence of healing. You see that tree? I know we're in a podcast, but you have the picture of a tree behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Just use a metaphor of a tree to consider the actual solution to chronic pain, mental and physical.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem with self-esteem is that much of it's based on cognitive distortions.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote a website post recently called Quit Searching for Your Authentic Self, because it's right in front of you. It's right here.
Mm-hmm.
So you're programmed by your entire past up to this very second. How you react to the current moment is programmed by your past experience. So this is it. Your authentic self is right here.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing better, nothing worse. This is it. So we're programmed. We're also programmed by who everybody else thinks we should be.
Right.
Parents, teachers, peers, marketing, brothers, sisters, whatever. We're programmed by what we think the world is telling us who to be.
Right.
The problem, going back to Lisa Feldman Barrett's work, is those concepts become our story, become embedded in our brain as clearly as this chair or table. And so you say, well, I'm not an artist. Well, that's a story. And then the worst part of it is we're pretty much programmed by people criticizing what we should or shouldn't do.
Yeah.
So that's where these obsessive thought patterns come into place. It's this endless should thinking, which is a cognitive distortion.
You get shitted to death. Don't shit on me.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody's doing it to you.
Yep.
But then your brain takes up the same concepts, and that's a huge, huge source of these obsessive thought patterns.
You buy the story, right? If someone shoulds on me and then I buy it, I'm now taking that. Boom. That's like, I think of Christmas was not too long ago, and I always watch A Christmas Carol. It's like my favorite, the Dickens story, and it makes me think of Jacob Marley. If you've ever seen it, and he carries a chain with him, it's like, you just added a link on the chain. You just bought that story, carry it forward.
Right. So that's, to me, the mother of all cognitive distortions is self-esteem.
Yeah.
So again, most of our obsessive thought patterns are cognitive distortions.
Yeah.
So it's things like labeling, mind reading, emphasizing the negative, minimizing the positive, should thinking, catastrophizing. These are all cognitive distortions.
Yeah.
These are all the stories we create about ourselves, but they're judgments.
Yep.
It's all about judgment. So with self-esteem, you're constantly judging yourself as better or worse than the next person, which even more perverse is that a person's identity becomes the worst part of the deal. So let's say, that's why I never could figure out why beautiful models had such a problem with body image disorders, because they're competing on body image. They're never good enough. They're I won't speak for you, but I'll speak for me. I'm not anywhere close to their physical appearance.
Yeah, I mean, I model on the weekends, but other than that.
But they have terrible self-esteem. So say you're a physicist or you're an athlete. So your identity, quote, identity becomes your monster.
Yeah, right.
By the way, we know about the white bear situation where when you try not to think about something, you think about it more. Again, you can't escape your thoughts.
All right.
So what happens, your demons your demons are actually who you're not. Right? Because, and we also find out that the most well-intentioned, conscientious people are more subject to this than people that are sociopaths, because they're not suppressing as much.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this self-esteem issue that I'm not this, this, and this. Then you have these demons in your head. But the other problem is, you have some bizarre, even despicable thought comes through your brain. Of course, you just toss it aside. I mean, why would you take it seriously? But what happened is that your brain just paid neurological attention to it. So it comes up again, you toss it aside again, then again, and again. Then really it's disturbing, so you just suppress it, which makes it even worse. So we know when you suppress unpleasant thoughts, they not only become stronger, they become a lot stronger. There's a huge trampoline effect. So with repetition, they become embedded in your brain. They become your story. I call them mini dust devils, which are those mini tornadoes in the desert. So you have these spinning circuits in your brain that just won't stop. On top of that, if you just picture basketball on your finger, that if you think the thought, you're spinning the basketball. And if you try not to think about the thought, you're spinning the basketball even faster.
Mm-hmm.
So again, with disturbing thought patterns, it's who you're not. They're bizarre. I mean, the more bizarre and despicable they are, you sort of keep tossing them aside. So again, what you call demons are actually robots. They're just neurological circuits, but they're actually who you are not.
Mm-hmm.
Their problem is they're so powerful and so numerous, it doesn't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
So you have probably trillions of these little mini circuits in your brain spinning away. You use all these supposedly rational means to feel better about yourself. They're completely non-responsive.
Mm-hmm.
So again, another way of being trapped.
Mm-hmm.
So I call it the curse of cognitive consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so what does one do?
Okay. So I used to play trumpet in high school. I wasn't great at it, but I wasn't bad.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, after 20 years of not playing my trumpet, I'm not very good at it.
Yeah.
So there's ways of separating from these thoughts. And as you pay less attention to them, pretty soon the basketball just drops off your finger.
Mm-hmm.
So as you quit paying attention to these things, why they actually quit spinning.
You buy what you pay attention to.
Right. Okay. But the problem is it's really tricky because it takes a skill set to actually solve the problem. So I'm going to use a metaphor of a popcorn machine at the theater,
Mm-hmm.
where the kernels come into the pot and the kernels represent your thoughts.
Yep.
So then it hits the cooker and then they explode into kernels of corn, which I'm going to call those the obsessive thought patterns.
Okay.
So the two parts of creating obsessive thought patterns is, first of all, we talked about repetition is a big deal. We talked about thought suppression being a big deal. So there's a tool called expressive writing where you divert the thoughts. In other words, you can't control your thoughts, but you can actually separate from them.
Mm-hmm.
So the thoughts are on the table, you're here. And there's a famous essay called The Seed of Our Undoing, which I'll send you the link if you would like.
Okay.
And they pointed out, again, the trampoline effect. If you try not to think about something, you think about it more.
Yeah.
Even worse than that, if you try to think about something positive, you actually think about it less. Either way, you're screwed. So the only initial first step, not the solution, the only thing that actually starts the process is called expressive writing. Simply write down these thoughts on paper, tear it up. Now it's just an exercise, and you're tearing it up for two reasons. The more clear the thoughts you get on paper, as despicable as they are, the more powerful the process. So you're simply separating from the thoughts. And the second reason to tear it up is to, besides writing with absolute freedom, is to not analyze them. Because as you write, all these issues come up. They're not issues. They're just thoughts. So in the healing journey that again, my own journey, which is reflected in the stuff we'll talk about in a second, is that it's the one necessary step that starts the healing journey. Wow. Nothing else works.
Write and rip.
Write and rip. And Dr. Pennebaker started the research in 1986. He was on one of our meetings the other week, and he sort of found it by accident. And he's dealing with survivors of sexual abuse. And he found out he found it out in women with chronic pain. Then he found out, as he did the expressive writing, it was almost all about sexual trauma when they were kids. And the point being is that he thinks that what you're doing what the writing is releasing secrets. It takes a lot of energy to keep secrets in your brain. Everybody has secrets. And so it may not be sexual trauma, but there's so many things that traumatize us in life, so many things we've done that are less than perfect. Simply writing them down works beautifully.
Mm.
So I did put a PDF together on expressive writing. You can do it in front of a mirror. You can do it verbally. You can write and rip. You can type it, whatever you want to do to get the thoughts.
Voice memo and then delete it.
Right. Make sure you delete it.
Yeah, right.
So the kernels of unpopped popcorn represent the thoughts. What the writing does, it diverts the thoughts out of the cooker. It doesn't get rid of all of them it doesn't divert all of them. So the second thing what the psychologists have not acknowledged is the physiology. You have to turn down the heat. Every person that truly heals has learned to process anger. Yeah. They've learned to calm themselves down. And so in my experience, I started expressive writing by accident. Within 2 weeks after 15 solid years, things started to shift. I go, In 6 weeks, I would say things were about 60% better, which was huge, but still a lot of intrusive thoughts, all sorts of things going on. 6 months later, I had to deal with anger, which I didn't even acknowledge that I had. I did it very poorly, but within 6 weeks after I muddled through that phase of my life, my symptoms disappeared.
Wow. Writing, you just continued to write?
So I have what's called the DOC Journey, which is a computer-based course. There's also an app that does the same thing. So the sequence is the writing is only the starting point. That's it. That's a necessary part of it.
Got it.
So there's 7 legs. First is just doing some simple things. So other ways of diverting your thoughts, by the way, are expressive writing is one. Mindfulness. You're going from crazy thoughts to different sensations. So you just drop your shoulders for a second. Feel the table or the chair. That's it. So you just put your brain from racing thoughts to a different sensation, and you can do that all day long.
Yeah.
Doesn't take any time.
Yeah, it doesn't take a tremendous amount of energy to say, I'm going to focus on how the chair feels under my butt for a second. I'm going to focus on this hand, on the coldness of the wood tabletop I'm touching right now.
Yeah, taste your food, whatever it is. You're simply switching sensory input. So that's where mindfulness comes into play. Cognitive behavioral therapy restructures your thinking. Yeah. So forgiveness. You're like the 90% of people in chronic pain have not forgiven the person or situation that injured them.
Yep.
So that's all the input. Remember the dynamic healing, you have the input, the nervous system, and the output. So what happens, I don't use the word forgiveness anymore, which again, if you're up for it, another huge podcast on anger. Every person that heals learns how to process anger.
Yeah.
There's no shortcuts to this.
Yeah. Makes sense.
So the metaphor is, then the third part of the metaphor is, so you've diverted the thoughts, you've turned down the heat. Like you pointed out before, as you turn down the heat, the thoughts slow down. Remember, the thoughts turn up the heat turns up the thought. So it's very bidirectional. That's why you can't just do it.
Right.
So expressive writing is just one step, but it's necessary. And then to get to anger processing, you have to understand anxiety first, being physiological. And there's ways of, like you said, breath work is anti-inflammatory, dropping it down. Then the third part of healing is that you put, I call it nurturing joy, where you talked about the spiritual journey or getting your perspective back.
Yeah.
So it's hard to have joy when you're anxious and angry.
Yeah.
So that's why it's 2 separate skill sets. One is learn how to process anger and anxiety. The other one is nurturing joy. And they're, of course, linked skill sets. But as your brain moves into a different part of your life about what do you want, it's magical.
Right.
It's not positive thinking, which is a way of suppressing negative thinking, but it's a positive outlook.
Yeah, right. Optimism.
Yep.
Love that.
So I don't want to go into detail about how to do this. I did put a process together called the DOC Journey. I think it's on your show notes.
Yeah, from the previous episode. We'll put a link again in this one.
And it represents the sequence that I went through, what my patients continue to go through, and we just had a tremendous amount of success with this.
Wow.
I got one girl right now who within a week is already starting to feel better. She's been through 8 years of severe hip pain. Surgeons wanted to do these big osteotomies on her. Not a good idea.
Wow.
It's I probably work harder at this than I should, but I'm watching people getting ready to try to go major medical interventions that are actually damaging, that don't work. And I'm watching hundreds of people go to pain free with no risk, minimal resources, and it's hard not to do.
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, that's the overview of you can change the input, you can increase the resiliency of the nervous system with diet, sleep, and exercise. You can directly lower the physiology. But at the end of the day, you should be trying to lower your time in threat physiology and maximize your time in safety. I call becoming a professional at living your life. They're all learned skills.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'd love, well, first, let me ask you this. How long have you had this sort of process figured out and then been helping to guide people through?
Started in 2006.
Okay.
I broke out of my own pain pathways in 2003, and I assumed the world knew how to do this. I figured I was just late to the game here. And so I wasn't, and I kept waiting for my rehab doctors to help me out. They weren't. This is not a psychological issue, so my pain psychologists weren't helping me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started doing this with my patients myself, and I tried lots of things that didn't work,
Mm-hmm.
and anything that worked I started to pursue. And then in 2009, I heard a lecture by Dr. Howard Schumner about all these symptoms that can be created by a fired up nervous system.
Yeah.
So my wife goes up and goes, I have this friend of mine who has 17 of these symptoms that you just listed. There was 33. And he looks at her and goes, you mean your husband? I go, and I didn't get it. That moment, within 10 minutes, my life changed. I realized that there's a common cause. I mean, how could I have 17 different symptoms disappear?
Yeah. Right. I mean,
Right?
Exactly. It's like the evidence is overwhelming.
Right. So it has to be a common cause. And so the bottom line, when you're in fight or flight chemistry, then every cell in your body is going to react in its own individual way. Your kidneys can be different than your brain, than your heart, than your lungs. Everything has a different set of symptoms. So again, they're all linked by the same common threat physiology. So then in about 4 years ago, I met a Dr. Stephen Porges, who wrote the polyvagal theory. And all of a sudden, we're able to explain everything by the body's autonomic nervous system about threat physiology versus safety. And that's how the doc journey evolved as the next phase of this, of actually, when people understand they don't have to take anxiety and anger personally. I mean, everybody has it.
Yep.
Why would we take it personally?
Yeah.
So it became really clear about 3 years ago, and that's how this last rendition, I call it the DOC journey, has become very based on the physiology. And there's an app which is a little bit more playful than the course. But if you think about this, play is the antithesis of pain.
Right.
It's a physiological state.
Right.
And you can't do both at the same time.
Right.
But you also can't just jump into play if your body's on fire.
Yeah. Right.
So that's why it's two linked but separate skill sets.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. It's very interesting to think of play as being the opposite pole of pain.
And there's actually quite a bit of data on this. Also, you've all heard about how music, rhythm, art, equine therapy, pet therapy all heal chronic pain.
Yep.
Well, people still think psychologically it's not true. Mm-hmm. You're changing the body's physiology by interacting with another living creature.
Yeah.
You're interacting with music. You're not distracting yourself, you're actually changing your physiological state.
Right. Right. I'm curious, and you probably shared some of these last time, if I recall, some of the results other than yourself that you've seen from this, people applying this approach.
Yeah, it just goes on and on. The person who wrote the foreword to my book had been in chronic pain for 9 solid years after he broke his back. And he had 3 major surgeons recommend a neck to pelvis fusion.
Wow.
And I looked at his spine. I'm going, Mark, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing to operate on here.
Oh, wow. And you know what you're talking about, obviously, as a doctor.
Yeah. And so he was shocked, and he's a PhD scientist. And He said, this is nonsense. Anyway, he started the expressive writing. that night at the urging of his girlfriend at the time. And within one night, his pain was gone by 60%. 2 days later, 70%. 3 days later, 85%. 6 weeks later, he was pain free.
Wow.
He was shocked. And I still stay in touch with him. That was in 2012, I think it was. Another woman I stay in a lot of contact with, her name is Rita. She's 85 years old. She was in chronic pain for 55 years. She's been out of pain for now eight or 9 years.
Wow.
Another gentleman had 28 surgeries in 20 years.
Wow.
He came out of chronic pain using the concepts we're talking about, and he's now been pain-free for about 6 years. And he not only is pain-free, see, what I'm excited about this, we're not fighting off anxiety and anger. You can thrive. So once you learn how to thrive, your brain goes that direction.
Yeah.
So people keep getting better and better and better.
Yeah.
They don't
that positive momentum really builds once you
Right.
kind of tip the scales, right?
But remember, it happens every day. In other words,
Yeah.
the general trajectory is positive. But I mean, myself about a month ago got badly triggered, went right back in the hole for about a week. But I know how to get out.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. People know how to get out of the hole.
Yeah.
So life keeps coming at you. So when your stresses are too high or your nervous system is too hyperactive, no sleep or whatever, you're going to go back into the symptoms. It's not like one and done. You just become, again, a professional at living your life.
Yeah.
So another girl, Dana, was in chronic pain for 4 years, underwent 2 failed spine surgeries, got way worse. And I worked with her for about a year, and she not only went to pain-free, she and her documentary girlfriend, I think they're now married, created a film called Love Heals that's now going to be on PBS this next year.
Wow.
And so they started to document her story literally in the hospital bed after the surgery, where she was so miserable. And when I started working with her, I'm going, this is not going to work. I didn't have any particular hope myself for her. And she's thriving at a level you just can't imagine.
Wow.
So that's, again, I get emails every week from people. It's about 90% self-directed.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody always does a bit better with a coach.
Mm-hmm.
There's some people who are so traumatized by their past, they're like a feral cat. And they get better, but it's harder. In other words, if you're like a feral cat, you don't trust anybody, nor should you.
Yeah. It's
hard to feel safe. And so that's where trauma therapy comes into play. So I don't hold up the doc journey as the ultimate answer since sliced bread. It's not about David Hanscom. All I've done is taken known, proven medical data and arranged it in a way that's accessible both to patients and physicians. And my thing for decades has been just, we have all this great research, but nothing changes.
Yeah.
Let's just do what we know.
Yeah.
And so I always say, look, it's not about genuine belief in the doc journey or David Hanscom. It's about connecting to your own capacity to heal. It has very little to do with me. I feel fortunate I can guide you the right direction, but you're the one that can heal yourself. And by the way, we did talk about this last time. It all begins by embracing your skepticism.
Yeah.
It's not about generating belief. It's about having hope. There's a big difference. So if you believe your body can heal, that's different than generating belief in some outside healing force. The healing force is actually inside you.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, look, embrace your disbelief, because that's what's there.
Yeah.
To embrace your healing capacity, you have to embrace everything.
Yeah.
So it actually starts with disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
And like, you don't have to believe one word I said this morning. That's fine. But just do it.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. It makes me think I had a woman named Mary Morrissey on the show a few weeks back. And she went from, prom queen type, president of the class to pregnant. And this is in like 1967, pregnant and outcast, and to the school with all the degenerates, to then self-deprecation, to all of a sudden her kidneys failing and needing replacement, if I'm remembering correctly. And she's basically, she was supposed to die, at 18 years old or whatever. And, someone came into her room before removing one of them, her kidneys the night before. And she's like, can you have hope that there's a possibility? And she's like, in her case, she's so skeptical. This woman was giving her these ideas and practice of sort of, what to do. And she said, I tapped into her belief because I could tell she believed it. And she ended up, coming out of it and surviving. The doctors had no rational understanding of how she survived because one kidney was destroyed and the other was barely hanging on. And now here she's, 70 some years old. And
Well, that's my point. Your body. So, okay, people say, well, this is miraculous.
yeah,
Right? Okay. Being alive is a miracle. I
Yeah.
mean, our human body is flat out a miracle.
right.
So when I say, again, just to clarify, and you did say this, is that the belief is in your own body's capacity to heal.
Yeah.
It's not even a belief in your capacity. It's a belief
Yeah.
in just allowing your body to heal. It's
How
a big
things work,
difference.
how things
Yeah.
can work. We've
Yep.
heard of it working, and there's evidence that
Right.
it has happened many times. These miraculous healings.
So the only thing you have to do is just, first of all, do it. Go through the steps that allow you to get out of your own way of healing.
Yeah.
You're just opening the door and allowing your body to heal. It's not work. It's letting go.
Yeah. And what's funny is I'm thinking back to her story is what the woman said, okay, just what's going to happen is they're going to remove your kidney tomorrow. And then after you start healing, you're going to start going back into these destructive thoughts about yourself. But
Right.
remember her writing it down on paper. She goes, remember what we're doing here tonight before the surgery. And this is a woman who just randomly came in to like pray with her before her
Wow.
surgery,
Wow.
and she goes, remember, we're going to do an exercise now where we take all that pain and self-judgment and hate and self-loathing and I'm a bad girl, and we're going to put it into this kidney. That's then going to get removed tomorrow. So when you come out of the surgery 10 days from now, you're going to start feeling better. You're going to start going back to those patterns. Remember, oh, hold on. We removed that from the system with the kidney. That all went with it. And that was her, an extreme version of writing it on paper, right?
Yep.
Except in the kidney. Much simpler to put it on a piece of paper before it gets to that point.
Yeah. So my personal mission is that unfortunately mainstream medicine looks at all this stuff as whatever, and they have
How can they? It's crazy.
they have no data. They do not have data. I don't know how they came off the physiological basis of disease into a structural model.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Yeah.
We learn this in high school, college, medical school. We learn this stuff. It's basic chemistry. It's basic physiology. And so right now, the business of medicine has taken advantage of this, and we're actively hurting people. We're very efficient at hurting people. We're not doing a good job. So that's my personal mission, to actually bring true healing back into medicine. This is not magic. It's nothing unusual. It's all deeply scientifically based. And again, I won't rant too much today, but there's not one research paper, not one paper in 60 years that documents that doing a fusion for back pain works. Not one.
Wow.
And we have 2,200 papers on expressive writing that it works.
Wow.
2,200 versus 0.
Wow.
But expressive writing does not make much money.
Yeah, right. There you go.
So it's really, the business of medicine has captured all of us. It's become very predatory. I'm not very happy with it, as you can tell. I quit my practice.
And you were doing it. That's where your journey began, as we talked about in the last episode, right? Like you were immersed as an orthopedic, spinal surgeon.
Yeah. No, I was doing it. I was a surgeon. I was watching patients. I was watching 3 to 5 patients badly damaged by spine surgery every week. I was watching hundreds of patients go to pain-free with no risk.
Sad.
And I just couldn't do it anymore.
Thank goodness for you breaking out of that. It's pretty dark, really, if you think about it.
It's very dark. Yeah, we can talk a lot about that too. So it's darker than you can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. Whew. Well, thank you, David, for, breaking the mold and shifting like you have, because, look at the people, look at the ripple of impact of that. And, it's just a pleasure to be able to help propagate this story and this perspective in the world.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you giving me the time to share my ideas. So that's what I'm doing. So I appreciate it very much.
Well, guys, gals, aliens, everyone tuning in out there, we'll put a link to, all of David's offerings, the app and the course and all those things in the show notes. So if you want to participate in that and go further with his process, that's certainly the way to do it. And as we sort of wind down here, David, is there any kind of final words or thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I just want to say that it's not just hope, it's reality. It's consistent. People can and will heal. And I don't care what shape you're in right this second. The stories are miraculous. Mm-hmm. And so, this is all a solvable problem.
Mm. Thank you, my friend. It's been such a pleasure and an honor having you back on. And thank all of you for tuning your beautiful brainwaves and incredible hearts into another episode. Until next time, journey well.